we'll get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Hannah from the Blue Hill Library, and I just wanted to start off by welcoming everyone to this program and saying hello from the library. We are so happy to be doing more and more of these virtual programs to try to keep people connected and keep getting information out to people. And I'm really grateful to Lander and the Blue Hill Heritage Trust for helping us to put this event together. So I'm going to hand it over to Lander to say a bit about how it'll work today and then introduce our speaker.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Hannah. We're super excited to be doing this collaboration with the library as well. So thank you so much, Hannah, for being willing to co-sponsor and co-host this program. Before I introduce Corrie, I'm just going to do a little bit of tech housekeeping. As you see, we have a chat box. If you'd like to include your name in the chat box and where you're from and why you're interested in the workshop, feel free to do that so we can get a sense of who's here. The chat box is also a great place for you to put your questions if they come up during the presentation. We will also have a Q&A at the end, and you can put your question right in the chat box for Hannah and I to help facilitate a conversation with Corrie for her to answer those questions. There should be a raise your hand icon at the bottom of your screen, and if you decide to click that and want to ask Corrie directly a question, I can unmute you to allow you to be able to do that. And if any tech questions come up, please feel free to put those in the chat box as well. So I'm going to introduce Corrie now. We're super excited to have Corrie Locke-Hardy. Corrie goes by she, they. She lives in Massachusetts, otherwise known as Nipmuc Land, and is a former classroom teacher and alum of UMass Boston and Simmons University, where she got a master's in gender and cultural studies. Corrie created a website along with her spouse in 2018 called The Tiny Activist, which you may have heard us talking about a few minutes ago. I highly recommend everyone check that out. It's fantastic. I go there all the time as a resource. And she also has a podcast, which takes a deep dive into the world of literacy, books, and publishing. And I have to put out a little shout out to my sister Lara, who introduced me to Corrie. They went to school together, and Corrie and I have been chatting a little bit over the past year, and so super excited that this whole thing has evolved and come together. So I think without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Corrie. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. I am so excited and, want to extend my thanks to both Hannah and Lander. So what I thought we would do is I have 2 books to read today for anybody who, wants to get in the groove with a story, and then we can sort of dive in, and I have a slideshow, and we're going to talk about some sort of depressing and then not so depressing things. So I thought that I would start with this book called Noodlephant, which came out last year, at the end of last year. It's absolutely incredible. It's by Jacob Kramer and K-Fi Steele, both incredibly talented people. I'll try to get nice and close. Once, there was an elephant who loved noodles. She loved noodles so much that all her friends called her Noodlephant. She loved to scoop noodles in huge, slippery slurps and eat them by the trunkload. She had neighbors of all sorts. Some had fur, some were smooth, some could roll, and some could fly. And some had deep pockets. Deep pockets is something people say when they have a lot of money. And these people with deep pockets were very, very bossy. Those were the kangaroos. The kangaroos were always making new laws. They made laws about who could swim at the beach, only kangaroos, and who could enjoy the butterfly garden, only kangaroos, and who could make laws? Only kangaroos. Noodlephant and her friends knew the laws weren't fair, but they didn't want to get thrown in the zoo. So instead of swimming at the beach, they cooled off in the sprinkler. Instead of visiting the butterfly garden, they watched moths dance in the lamplight. Instead of making laws, they made food for each other. Noodlefant in particular was famous for her pasta parties. She loved to mix whole bags of semolina flour with dozens of eggs, delighting her guests with noodles of all shapes and sizes. For special occasions, she gathered wild mushrooms to make her grandmother's secret sauce. One day, while Noodlefant was shopping for a party, a kangaroo blew his whistle. "You there, elephant, what are you doing with all those eggs and semolina flour?" Said Noodlefant, trying to stay calm. "I was thinking of a fresh batch of fettuccine, maybe curly cavatappi would be nice, or I could stretch a tangle of tagliatelle." "Oh, no, you won't," snapped the kangaroo, pulling a law book from his pouch. "Elephants are no longer allowed to eat noodles. It says so right here. Noodles are for kangaroos. Elephants shall only eat sticks and branches." "Maybe you don't know me," said Noodlefant, "but I'm Noodlefant. I'm all about noodles." "You're an elephant," said the kangaroo. "If we catch you eating noodles, we will lock you in the zoo. Buy some acacia branches and don't even think about noodles." Walking home, Noodlefant couldn't help but think about noodles. She thought about their shapes and colors and all of their Slurpee sauces. When her friends arrived, Noodlefant had nothing to offer them. She tried pouring tomato sauce on the acacia branches, but they were not slippery. They were not slurpable. The thorns prickled and poked inside their bellies. As Noodlefant gazed at her tender belly button, its shape reminded her of something. A tortellino. All at once, she had an idea, a fantastic idea, a revolutionary idea for a completely new kind of machine. Together, Noodlefant and her friends tapped and tinkered, singing as they worked. "Those kangaroos are kangarooed, making rules about our food, telling us how we should think, what we can eat, and what to drink. When our new machine is done, we'll all eat pasta by the ton, 'cause noodles are for me's and you's, not just those bossy kangaroos." They called the machine the Fantastic Noodler. It was very complicated, but also very simple. With a few turns of the crank, it could turn anything into noodles. Noodlefant tossed in some pens. She turned the crank, and out tumbled a pile of overcooked penne pasta. Too soggy. She knocked a dent in the side, and the next batch was perfectly al dente. They looked around the house and found some more to transform, cranking cans into cannelloni, pillows into ravioli, and radiators into radiatori. The noodles were slippery, slurpy, and scrumptious. It was a grand pasta party, the best one yet. That is, until, Come out with your trunk up. The kangaroos tried Noodlefant in a kangaroo court. They said she had broken the laws. Noodlefant said the laws were already broken. All kangaroos? That doesn't seem very fair. She declared, "The laws for elephants and shrews, tortoises, fruit bats, and gnus should be the same as those we use for all you wealthy kangaroos." "Guilty," said the judge. As she was being led away, Noodlefant shouted, "Justice is for all of us, not just for the bossiest. And though right now it sounds absurd, one day you'll want to eat your words." Each day, a zookeeper brought Noodlefin a pile of thorny acacia branches, and each day she refused to eat them. She was on strike. Weeks passed, and Noodlefin got thinner and thinner. When her friends visited, they worried about her health. They urged her to eat, but she was resolute. The kangaroo laws aren't fair, and everyone knows it. I'll starve before I eat a single thorn. Her friends called the kangaroos and wrote them letters. They protested outside the courthouse. Some kangaroos agreed the laws were wrong, but most didn't care. And so Noodlefin remained alone, stuck in the zoo. Her friends agreed they had to do something. One lonesome day, Noodlefin received a letter. Dear Noodlefin, we know you don't like acacia branches, but we wish you would try them tonight. Deep down, you might just find they're fantastic. Love, your friends. That evening, Noodlefin accepted the zookeeper's pile of thorny branches. She dug deep down with her trunk and found the fantastic noodler. For an appetizer, she cranked the letter into a steaming bowl of alphabet soup. Then, Noodlefin clamped the machine to the bars of her cage. Slowly and quietly, she turned the crank. The iron bars collapsed into a pile of warm udon, which she scooped up in slippery slurps. She had never been so happy to see her friends. They decided to throw a pasta party, the like of which had never been seen. Noodlefin's friends spread the word. Everyone is welcome so long as they brought something to share. As for Noodlefin, she knew the time had come to make something truly special. She ventured deep into the forest to snuffle out wild mushrooms for her grandmother's secret sauce. As the sun rose over the courthouse square, the animals began to cook. Smells wafted over the town, sizzling onions mixed with simmering tomatoes, the tang of raw garlic blended with fresh basil and Parmesan cheese. Soon, the guests began to arrive. Each animal brought something different to crank through the fantastic noodler. Together, they turned corkscrews into cavatappi, flowers into fiori, and wheels into rotelli. That is, until... What do you all think you're doing here? Uh-oh. Welcome to our potluck, said Noodlefin. Our guests have all brought something to share. Do you have anything to offer? The kangaroo brandished his law book and began. The law is the law. It says right here, noodles are for kanga. What a thoughtful contribution, said Noodlefin. With a flick of her trunk, she whisked the law book from the kangaroo's paw and cranked it through the machine. Out came a piping hot slice of lasagna covered in bubbling cheese. She topped it off with mushroom sauce and gave it to the kangaroo. What a face! It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. The other kangaroos lined up to crank their laws through the fantastic noodler, turning out tray after tray of mushroom lasagna. The town celebrated long into the night, singing together. When the laws are so unjust, misbehavior is a must. Together we will make new rules to share along with fresh noodles. 'Cause noodles are for me's and you's, we won't be locked up in the zoos. We'll slurp them down on avenues, at the beach, and in canoes. Yes, noodles are for me's and you's, we'll even share with kangaroos. The end. I love that book so much. And then the other book that I thought would be really great to share is called We Are Water Protectors. And this book is really great. It's written by Carol Lindstrom and Michaela Goad, and it's actually an Own Voices book. Both the author and the illustrator are Indigenous. We are water protectors. Water is the first medicine, Nokomis told me. Nokomis is a Ojibwe for grandmother, actually. There's a very helpful glossary in the back. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. The river's rhythm runs through my veins, runs through my people's veins. My people talk of a black snake that will destroy the land. I'm not sure if you all can see it, but you can sort of see a black snake right there. Spoil the water, poison plants and animals, wreck everything in its path. When my people first spoke of the black snake, they foretold it wouldn't come for many, many years. Now, the black snake is here. Its venom burns the land, courses through the water, making it unfit to drink. Take courage. I must keep the black snake away from my village's water. I must rally my people together. To stand for the water, to stand for the land, to stand as one against the black snake. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. It will not be easy. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, the winged ones, the crawling ones. The four-legged, the two-legged, the plants, trees, rivers, lakes. The earth, we are all related. Tears like waterfalls stream down, tracks down my face, tracked down my people's faces. Water has its own spirit, Nokomis told me. Water is alive. Water remembers our ancestors who came before us, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. We are stewards of the earth. Our spirits have not been broken. We are water protectors. We stand. The black snake is in for the fight of its life. And there's lots of super interesting information in the back because this book was actually written and designed to teach people about all of the indigenous activism surrounding pipelines and oil pipelines. So those are the two books that I have to share with you. And
those were amazing, Corrie. Thank you so much. I love the way you read too. I could listen to you for hours.
Thank you. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a slideshow. And then if anybody has any questions, throw it in the chat box. I would be happy to answer it after. Oh, Lander, it says I was disabled from sharing my screen.
Sorry, Corrie, I can fix that for you really quick.
No worries. Thanks.
Okay, give it a try now.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, in case you just got here and you missed the introduction, I am Corrie Locke-Hardy, and I'm going to be giving a presentation called Breaking Down the Monolith, Tips for Building an Inclusive, Diverse Bookshelf. So as an introduction, I am the co-founder of a website called The Tiny Activist, and I have a bachelor's in early education. I worked in the classroom for about 3 years and then got a master's degree in gender and cultural studies. And one of my huge passions is to amplify quality books that especially have a social justice component and use them to create curriculum that's both anti-bias and anti-racist. And in addition to the website, I also give talks about gender stereotyping in the classroom and how to create a classroom or a home culture that promotes stereotype-free learning. And so a handful of my examples today are sort of some things that I have gleaned from doing that work.
Corey, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think we're seeing the presenter view. So we're not seeing the slide you're on full screen. I just wonder if there's a quick way. It's not a huge deal, but if there's a quick way to make it so that we're just seeing the slide you're on, I think it'd be easier. Oh, that's it. Easier to read. Thank you.
Perfect. I have two screens, so I can't tell like what screen is being shown. There we go. That should be much easier for people to see there. Thank you for that interruption. I appreciate it. So I at first wanted to sort of talk about, the Tiny Activist as an entity and what we do and sort of how we use these basic tenets to sort of shape our own bookshelf, which I think can help, some folks shape theirs as well. And that first point is really amplifying own voices, which if you were here for the second book I read, We Are Water Protectors, I mentioned that it was an Own Voices book. And in case you're unfamiliar with that term, Own Voices describes a literary movement that when you write and feature books written by people from within the community that is being written about. And it was actually started by an author named Corinne Davis on Twitter in 2015. And Davis started the hashtag as a way for these voices to be designated as stories that were told by their communities. And so some examples would be, like the book that I showed you, an Indigenous author and illustrator talking about Indigenous activism. Another example would maybe be some queer Latinx individuals talking about those intersections of identity within a children's book. And while an author from another ethnic group may revere and be knowledgeable about these subject matters, having an Own Voices author really provides a voice that is closer to the lived experiences of people within that group. So having a voice from a marginalized community that is being written about provides a more authentic look into, just one facet of that group's experiences. And the second one would be intersectionality, which is, a pretty hot buzzword. And so that was actually developed by a Black feminist legal scholar named Kimberly Crenshaw, who's completely incredible. And she introduced that into her work in 1989. And intersectionality is, if we're going to go, by the dictionary definition, then it would be the complex cumulative ways in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, and classism, sort of combine and overlap and intersect, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals or groups. And she really developed this term during a large legal case where some Black women who worked at a factory were saying they were discriminated against because they were both Black and because they were women. Thus, those two intersections of identity contributed to the experience that they had at their job. And the third one, affirmation and empowerment. So a lot of times we hear some terms, like tolerance and acceptance. And in my opinion, these are very minimal and neutral because it doesn't really take any extra effort for someone to tolerate another person or to accept their humanity. The concept of tolerance itself, being enough, has to be eradicated because marginalized and oppressed people don't just deserve to be respected, affirmed, and empowered. They have the right to it as human beings. And awareness is sort of yet another example of an unwillingness to fight the status quo. And as citizens of our global community, educators, parents, we really need to be aware of these various oppressive structures that hold people down and disenfranchise them. And so the important step is to begin the journey of actively dismantling these structures, which again ties back to why Own Voices was created by Dybus. And next would be community. And we should all, really be inspired to meet people from various experiences who hold multiple identities, especially me being an educator. I know that learning can come from absolutely anywhere, anytime, any place, a lot of times when I don't really expect it. And I truly believe that everybody has something that they can teach other people. And I just get so excited and welcome these thoughtful and compassionate interactions with other people, especially the ones that are on this journey towards liberation with me, like all of you today. And the very last one would be actively standing up to injustice. And especially as a white and able-bodied person who benefits from just a huge amount of privilege, I personally cannot sit by and just idly observe the injustices that I see both in my local communities and on a larger global scale. By doing so, I would continue to be complicit within the forces that make marginalized people do the work for their own liberation. And I therefore should be the one that makes the effort to keep my ear to the ground and, follow all these amazing grassroots artists, authors, organizers, theorists, and spread all the information that I can to all the lovely people that in the spaces that I inhabit, in real life and online. So that's like a small bit about me. Let's hop in to why we're all here, which would be, why do we need an inclusive bookshelf? So if we look at these two images, which I hope you'll be able to read, the numbers are a little bit small. So the one on the left are statistics. There is, within the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin, they do a children's book roundup every year and break it down by percentages. So we can see that of the diversity in children's books in 2018, 50% of the protagonists were white, followed by 27% were animals. That's 77% if you picked a random book off the shelf. Whereas if we look at the other real live human beings that are in our communities and our classrooms, only 10% were African or African American, 7% were Asian Pacific Islander, Asian Pacific American, 5% Latinx, 1% Indigenous. So these are wildly out of proportion for our current community and what our globe actually looks like. So that was 2018. We look at 2019. I tried to highlight the exact percentages. It's a little bit difficult. There's no jazzy illustration, but 2020 has been a trip so far. So we can see that white protagonists have dropped 8.2%, where only 41.8% of total books had a white protagonist. But animals have actually grown by 2%. So now we're at 29%. So Black and African protagonists are up by 1.9%, and Asian Pacific Islander protagonists have grown by 1.75%. So even though we're seeing small amounts of growth, things are still wildly off kilter. You're still much more likely to find a bookshelf that has the majority white children or protagonists, and then next would be animals. So based on these, before I foreshadowed some depressing things, this is one of them. So we can clearly tell by this that the publishing industry is incredibly off balance. And this is also why I care so deeply about the books that I share on the website and recommend to folks, and why we really need to be making pointed, careful choices about the books that we have on our bookshelf. And there's a few reasons for why the publishing industry publishes the books that it does. And I think in order to understand this, I have a little bit of history about the publishing industry for you. I'm going to try not to throw too many percentages at you in case you're not a person who likes very specific numbers. I really like very specific numbers. I think that it sort of helps to be able to cite that data and then be able to track changes. And basically, the majority of major publishing companies in the US, this is a generally very American-centric presentation, just because this is where I live and this is the most information I have about the publishing houses. And the majority of major ones were basically created from the 1920s to the 1940s. And you can think of there's about 5 major publishing companies that are in the United States. Simon & Schuster, Random House, Farrar, Straus & Giroux, which is now part of Macmillan. Those were all started during this time. And in this industry, along with the majority of industries, we face massive disparity between who's hired, how much they're paid, and it all boils down to perpetuating systemic racism. And the specific publishing industry has 3 main factors that really contribute to its overarching whiteness, and that is the history of its employment practices, acquisitions meetings, and general corporate hegemony of bookselling. Hegemony, it's a difficult word. So the publisher Lee & Low, which was founded in 1991, is actually the largest multicultural children's book publisher in the United States. And they do a survey every couple of years just sort of about the publishing industry, and that's where we get a lot of this really good data about who works there in the publishers, how they identify. And so they did one in 2015, and then they did just one in 2019, this past year. And so the survey that they did showed publishing as a whole in the US is 76% of the employees are white, 81% are heterosexual, and 74% of them are cisgendered women. So if you're unfamiliar with the term cisgender, just means that they do not identify as transgender. So 78% of upper level management is white, but that has dropped from 86% in 2015. So again, we see these like tiny inklings of change, but still overall, you're much more likely to run into a straight white lady that works in the publishing industry, much like you're also about 80% likely to have an early education teacher that's a straight white lady. However, Lee & Low has found that in 2019, 49% of the incoming interns were BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, 49% were LGBTQ, and 22% self-identified as disabled. So this is really awesome and amazing. We're seeing a bunch of diversity up and coming. But if we look traditionally at the publishing industry, it's focused in New York City. There's unpaid internships, which is a form of gatekeeping, so who can afford to do an unpaid internship in New York City? It's white people who have money. Who can afford to have a low-paying publishing industry job? It's, the white people with generational wealth. So in general, because there's so little movement, it's especially difficult to break in, and it's already majority white. So even if you happen to be, a Black, Indigenous person of color, and you're able to break into the industry, you're still vastly outnumbered because of the racial inequalities within the industry. Now, if we think about the acquisitions meeting aspect of it, so an acquisitions meeting is when executives meet in a room and they think about all the books that have been pitched to them, to their publishing industry. So Simon & Schuster sits down, a room filled with white cisgender executives, and the publicists sort of pitch the books that they've gotten, like, oh, I really like this one. This is what it's about. I think it could be really great. But if we have this homogenous group, how accurately can they predict what BIPOC readers around the entire country, not in New York City, are going to want to read? And so this is the perfect environment for racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia. It can all flourish in here, because traditionally, if we have this homogenous group that's deciding, then they're going to want to go with like the safe books that they know that they can make money on. And even if the editors pitch the books that they've received from a variety of diverse authors, they still, are beholden to the profit line. And if this is something, quote unquote, new or hasn't been published before, and the publisher decides to take it on, it still matters, how big is the marketing budget? Who's going to learn about the book? If you don't give it a huge marketing budget, you're basically dooming it to failure, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So these meetings have developed to prioritize, the safe conservative books, and the comfort of these white cisgender straight executives is being prioritized over the BIPOC creators. And the third, if we look at generally just book selling in the last few years, the last 25 or 30 years, we see a lot of corporatization, like Barnes & Noble, Borders, which has gone out of business, and Amazon. So Amazon currently has 50% of the entire literary purchase market, because for years and years and years, they were willing to sell books very cheaply to develop brand loyalty. Like, oh, I'm just going to go on Amazon and get that. They were willing to lose money to get any dollars that they can. So that means that if you have a Barnes & Noble that are, however many stores they have, let's say 600, if you have one or a couple, executives that are doing all of the buying for Barnes & Noble, then all of the books are being delivered that are exactly the same. You don't have these indie bookshops anymore that are buying based on what their actual clientele wants. Barnes & Noble is just doing like a general, oh, I guess these will sell, everyone likes gardening, sort of situation. However, again, I'm not trying to depress you the whole time here. I'm like trying to help. Small good thing is, in the last few years, this guy named James Daunt, he is credited with sort of turning around Waterstones, which is a bookshop in the UK. He's in charge of Barnes & Noble, and basically how he revived Waterstones and how he's using a model now for Barnes & Noble is returning to this indie book selling model where individual Barnes & Nobles are allowed to make their own purchasing instead of just being delivered books. But again, it's still a large corporation that is in charge of all of these things, but now they're returning back to the model that they drove out of business, 15 years ago or so. So with all of these words that I just said, we can really tell how inequality was baked into the publishing industry from the beginning. And I think that two other main things too are contributing to what we're seeing now, and the vast whiteness that's in the publishing industry, and that would be implicit bias, and then one other. And so implicit bias is an attitude or a stereotype that affects understandings, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So we all have these, we all grow up, and I will use the example about gender and gender stereotypes. So because we're all raised and we have these implicit biases, then, we're imparting these onto our own kids, their friends, our students. which can be really limiting to their own personal expression. And an example that I would think of would be, assuming that you know a child's favorite color or TV show or activity because of the sex they were assigned at birth. So if I was a teacher in a classroom, my implicit bias might drive me to be like, oh, look at those boys sitting on the carpet. I bet they want trucks to play with. And even, we all do it. Sometimes we take the easy way out, but we need to be aware of sort of where these thoughts are coming from. Did I make that decision to give, the boys the trucks on the carpet because I know them and they've been my students for 6 months and they love anything with a wheel on it? Or did I just, out of the corner of my eye, see some dudes and be like, trucks, dudes and trucks? So I really, encourage you to take a second and, make sure you're not going the easy route and picking the more gendered option for something. Like if you have to run to the store to get a birthday gift on the way to a classmate's birthday party. And then the second one, I think that higher education plays a big role in the publishing industry as well with implicit bias. So higher education prepares, a lot of us for our careers, not all of us. But if we think about sort of where employers are coming from these unbalanced industries, publishing and early education, we have to ask, what is being taught in higher education? How are these professionals being prepared for the job market, the job world? And is what they're being taught working for the society that we already have or for the society that we want to have? And this is just a basic generalization. We, of course, know that there are so many other barriers to entry, like, the unpaid internships, which will further marginalize, so many students. But so if we think about, especially in the teachers college, my education program, the pre-service professionals, they should be required to complete practicums or internships within settings that serve racially and economically diverse populations, and they should be paid for those. And having all these types of opportunities, actually teaching the people, not just the people that are in the community, not just, the elite, it will just go so far in being able to meet the unique needs of all children, and specifically the very unique needs of students of color, having that white authority figure in the classroom. And while this does undoubtedly happen in some programs, intensive critical race theory classes doesn't happen in undergrad, and it certainly doesn't accompany these practicums if you have the practicum requirement at all. And so if we have these unbalanced higher education systems where we're not taught about white supremacy, we're not taught about Eurocentrism that's already in the curriculum, if we're not taught holistic histories of the area that we're going to be teaching in, it's up to the parents and caregivers to supplement the education that their children are actually receiving. Because if the teachers are not prepared, and they're not prepared in higher education, and they're not prepared in the publishing industry, then all of these cycles are just going to be perpetuated. And the books that kids are exposed to in the classroom and at the library are still going to be racially unbalanced. And so I think it's up to us to really be able to supplement them. And so let's talk about, okay, great. I've sat here for 20 minutes and scared you and depressed you for a while. Let's actually talk about creating the diverse bookshelf. So one tip that I really like, which a lot of people have probably heard about, but if you don't, it's a concept of windows and mirrors, which is also sometimes stated as windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. And this is a way to look at a book and think about a book, how it can either be a window into somebody else's lived experiences, or it can be a mirror and reflect your own experiences back to you. And so there are two professionals that really did a lot of work on this in the late 80s and early 90s, Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop and Emily Stile. And Dr. Bishop wrote this really good quote. I'm going to read it. Sorry if you've already read it quietly. So, books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers only have to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created and recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading, then, becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. So, thinking back to the image that I showed you a few slides ago about the percentages of protagonists in children's books, like white protagonists, the mirror thing is down. Like, that is great. Everyone, all the experiences reflected back. But what we're not seeing is the mirrored experiences of, especially Indigenous children with only 1% of the books. They have so many windows, they have so many sliding glass doors, but they don't have enough mirrors. And because when we look at books, especially in early education or, reading time at home, fairy tales they really reflect a society's socially accepted values, and especially they tell us what gender scripts are accepted in our culture and how acceptable it is to act in specific ways. And so we can really see, if we think about a lot of traditional fairy tales that we grew up with, princesses, Disney princesses, girls are really told a lot of things of what they should be, what they should look like, and how they should act. So this can be incredibly limiting to everybody, because everybody should wear a fancy dress if they want. I don't want to wear fancy dresses, but go on with your bad self, wear fancy dresses, We really also need those books that can challenge the really traditional notions of gender, and especially introduces the concept that gender is a spectrum and not just a binary that needs to be reinforced, so that we can have those windows and mirrors for students who maybe fall somewhere within that beautiful spectrum of gender. And it's truly the responsibility of, if the educators aren't engaging in all of this unbiased work with students, then again, it's up to the parents and caregivers to be able to supplement this. And especially in a time when we might not be going back to school for a few months, and if we do, school is going to look really different, then it's an opportunity to now introduce a lot of things and have a lot of really great discussions about how people can be, and how people can be however they are, and that's a beautiful thing. So another point that I also want to make about an intentional bookshelf, which is there's often, we see how many animal protagonists they are, but what we also see is a usage of anthropomorphized animals to make, a statement about a big topic. That could be LGBTQ experiences, that could be, there's a lot of books about how an animal is different and that's okay, but I personally, this is me, Corrie Locke-Hardy's opinion, which, sorry, you signed up for, to listen to all my opinions. I think that sometimes people try to use these books with animal protagonists to sort of soften the blow with these big topics and sort of try to ease the situation and try to explain something that is sometimes seen as so big and so scary, which, you know, is a valid concern. I completely understand. However, there are studies that suggest children develop better empathy with humans as characters, instead of having animals be the great equalizer. And if there are definitely some books that have animals, you know, I read one today, Noodlefant specifically, I love so much. There's another book called Neither, which is a really beautiful story, and I think it really explains the metaphor well of being non-binary, because it sort of smushes two animals together, which I think can be a super helpful image for young children, and, you know, about sort of how other people are non-binary or gender non-conforming. And, you know, I totally understand conceptually. And like, I get wanting to explain things to kids in an engaging way. You know, animals are totally engaging. They're super rad. They do all sorts of wild and amazing things. You know, like I said, I went to college, I paid tens of thousands of dollars to learn how to talk to children in an engaging way. And that's really and truly what taught me that I know that we need more human characters, because that's who these kids are going to learn how to empathize with. And I don't really care if the tiger is sad and the white kid recognizes it. I need the white kid who is a potential oppressor to empathize with and struggle and understand the struggle of marginalized people in society, and then figure out how to dismantle that and create a better world. So these are what our bookshelves can do and what I think they should be doing. So let's look at some tips for actually choosing books. So, okay, we've gone on this journey. We have gotten so many tips. We're like, I'm gonna buy some books. How do I buy the books? How do I know what's good? How can I do it? First of all, I have a resource for you. I sent Lander a super helpful PDF about how to tell if there are problematic elements in a book that you're looking at. The 4 pictures that I have here are all 4 really great books that I enjoy very much. And I think that you can really break it down to these 6 points. So we want to look at the storyline, we want to look at the illustrations. So if we are at the library, flipping through the books, as we all love to do, we're reading a story. So how are the problems in the story presented? How are they conceived? How are they resolved? You know, are BIPOC characters considered to be the problem? Are the oppressors faced by the marginalized and women represented? Is the main issue related to social justice? Are the problems actually resolved by the situation changing, or is it resolved because people have sort of resigned themselves that things are going to be unfair? So if we think about Noodlefant, there was community organizing, there was petitions, there was hunger strikes. You know, they changed the situation. They didn't accept, in the beginning, they accepted that it was inevitable. They were like, okay, if I can't go to the beach, I'll use the sprinkler. But in the end, they changed it. And is the person that's resolving the problem, is it seen as like a white savior? Is it a benevolent white person that's coming in to save the day? And what's the role of women? Are they, you know, are they doing stereotypical things? Is there any loaded vocabulary with specific words that could be used as derogatory towards marginalized people? And then, so we're moving into the illustrations. You know, we talked again about the stereotypes. Do we see a lot of tokenism? And then who are really the active doers in the story? Who is resolving the problem? Who is doing what? Are all the women, all the girl characters like sitting and waiting for a boy to solve the problem? Which all of these sound so antiquated to say, but sometimes, you know, you look at a book like 10 or 15 years old and you're like, oh my goodness, no, I would not read that to anybody I know. And when you're sort of looking at the language, something that I think a lot of educators do, myself included, in the classroom, sometimes, you know, you might change some pronouns. You want to make the truck into a girl. And, you know, you want to have a few characters that use they, them pronouns. You know, you want to be able to sneak those intersections of identity into the story as best you can when you grab one on a shelf that, you know, maybe isn't the best. But you really can't change the illustrations. You know, so it's so crucial to have these accurate and comprehensive representation in your bookshelf and in all of your books. And it really requires, you know, like a conscious effort to provide that varied experience and have a comprehensive bookshelf, because, you know, if children never see Black female doctors in any books, they're not going to think that they exist. And especially young girls of color aren't going to be able to see that, you know, this is a career avenue, that they could actually be a doctor. And so let's prepare for some teachable moments, which is a lovely phrase that if any educators are listening, they will know exactly what I mean. So if you come across, you know, something potentially problematic or harmful in a book, you know, you really can't be afraid to have a conversation about it. And especially sometimes kids really catch us off guard and it's difficult to formulate the perfect response, or, you know, there's a lot of pressure to feel like you have the perfect response immediately. And what I have found is, you know, you can say, oh, I'm really not sure, let's learn together. And being able to model that adults don't always know the exact question. You can always learn together. You know, I think it's really important for kids to be able to develop the critical thinking skills that they need to like really think through a problem and really recognize that, you know, the adult in your life isn't infallible. It was a tough lesson to learn for me, you know, but that's life. Do any of us know what we're doing? Only sometimes. I also find it super helpful to use personal and concrete examples. You know, you're reading a book, a little boy has a purple backpack. You hear a voice in the back, boys can't have purple backpacks. You're like, I can't have boys have purple backpacks. My brother has a purple backpack. He loves it. It has so many pockets. It's great. You know, being able to tie that back to a direct, like, oh, okay. When I was in the classroom, I don't know if you can see now, I have purple hair, but there was another Corrie in the school. So they used to call me Miss Corrie with the purple hair. And they would be like, Miss Corrie with the purple hair's brother has a backpack that's purple. The backpack and the hair match, you know, like being able to have that like concrete narrative with kids, it makes things so much more easy for them to understand. And especially being able to reply to, you know, if you hear a biased statement or something just like really comes out of left field, it really opens up a dialogue and lets kids, you know, think through it themselves, think for themselves, and really gives them new information. And an anecdotal example that I have was, I was in a classroom just as an observer, not teaching. And so during show and tell, this little girl comes up, her mom had given her some makeup to play with. So she brought it in, she was super jazzed. She was like, I got makeup, I am the fanciest. And, you know, all the other girls in class, super jazzed. And this one super precious little boy, he was like asking questions, so jazzed, except the girl and all the other girls were completely ignoring him and not answering his questions. And the teacher was ignoring him. And so in this situation, there are a lot of messages being shared. The little boy is learning that it's not okay for him to ask these things. The little girls, and especially the one sharing, is getting the message of, oh, well, my teacher is ignoring him, the person in charge that's ignoring him, you know, that means I can ignore him too. It's okay. It's not okay for him to ask these things, but it's okay for me to ignore him because he's not doing what he should be doing, you know? So you don't have to have the perfect answer, but you have to acknowledge it, because not acknowledging it is an even stronger message than acknowledging it, which is what I tell in that anecdote, which is like very educational, but very, very sad. And then, so what does a non-inclusive bookshelf mean for kids? It's giving them all those messages, just like I was talking about in the example. You know, children's opportunities for creativity and imagination are being taken away, especially for BIPOC children that are looking at the shelf. They're not seeing their own experiences represented. They're not seeing, you know, Black scientists and astronauts. They're not seeing Indigenous artists. They're not seeing, you know, Latinx chefs. They're only seeing white kids and animals. And, you know, if they're, in terms of like gender expression and personal expression, you know, if they're not seeing that it's really okay to be yourself and however you want, then these kids are being, you know, shown like, oh, it's not okay for me to truly express myself. And these are where the gender biases are being reaffirmed. And it's where you start getting the messaging like, I can't do this because I'm a girl. Any AFAB person, assigned female at birth person, I'm sure, like me, can remember their teacher being like, I need a really strong boy to help me move this desk. And then like the passion of feminist rage inside of you at the age of 7 being like, oh, move the desk. Could just be me. And that's totally fine if that was just me. But sorry, care so passionately. You know, when kids aren't being shown what they could be and what other people can be, then they don't know it, because it's one of those things that what they're not being told, you know, for example, a friend was like, oh my gosh, my friend, or like my child said that boys can't marry other boys, you know, but I don't know why. I've never told them that. And I was like, well, did you ever tell them or read a book about how boys can marry boys? She was like, no, but I didn't say that they couldn't. I was like, well, I mean, they're kids. They're not seeing it, so they don't think that it can happen. And so it's important that we really, you know, their little spongy brains are just soaking all the stuff up. So we got to give them all the stuff to soak up. And something especially, this is one of my favorite quotes that I've ever heard. I attended a conference, and the Gender Spectrum Conference, which is a super rad organization that I can't wait to tell you about. And the person was talking about having, you know, a bookshelf in the classroom. And the person basically said, you know, teachers are waiting, children are hiding. And sort of referring to the idea that teachers are like waiting for somebody, you know, that maybe exhibits traits outside of the binary. Maybe a little boy starts school, his favorite thing is an Elsa dress from Frozen to wear. And, you know, and the teacher is just like, I can't wait. As soon as this kid starts, we're going to have all the books about how anybody can wear a dress and girls can play with trucks, you know. But you don't have to like begin talking about all of these topics at home or in school when there's a real life example. You know, these are sort of things that we should be doing from the get-go instead of waiting, you know, because there could be a child who is having like a lot of inner turmoil, and because they don't think it's okay to express themselves, but really, you know, the teacher is waiting. I just think that's a great metaphor. I just love it so much. So I got some helpful tips for you. I really feel like if we're thinking about books or we're thinking about language, you know, discussing books, everyone really can remember to use neutral terminology, especially if you don't know the gender of maybe an animal in the book or a person in the book. It's really easy. It's not really easy. It's like a, you know, thing you got to work at. But to say like, oh, I don't know what that dog is doing. I bet they like to play fetch though, because my dog really likes to play fetch. And there's a tendency too, we sort of live in a society where we're cultured to call anything he, you know, especially the animals that we like deem as masculine, like spiders. Like there are girl spiders because we have spiders, you know, and like there are boy butterflies because we have butterflies, you know. So I think it's really easy to sort of fall back on just the he, but if you work, you know, you can use they, especially when you don't know the pronouns that somebody uses. Next would be challenging stereotypes, whether or not you see that in a book or, you know, maybe on a billboard, and take these opportunities to like have a discussion with anybody around. I'm real fun at parties, I'll tell you that. I'm really not. But you know, there's like so many great conversational opportunities to take where you can sort of talk about like, what are we seeing? Do you think that everybody feels this way? What about like what this person is wearing, you know? And the last would be to complement substance, especially, you know, little girls are often told, oh my gosh, you're so cute. I love your shirt. Oh, I love, you know, your hair looks so great. But if we think about it, if we are giving compliments, even to characters in books, you know, we want to try to be complimenting the intangible qualities like the bravery, the thoughtfulness, their, you know, artistic spirit. So those are just 4 things that I try to do all the time that I think are really helpful and can start some really good conversations. And then, because we're getting to the end here, which is so wild, I have a list of resources that I thought might be helpful for you. The first one is the organization Gender Spectrum, and they're actually an online organization, and they have resources for parents, professionals, and also for youth. They have a lot of specifically gender diverse youth. They have a lot of online groups. They have meetups. They also have a conference every year that's sort of split into 2 halves, which is gender diverse people that work with gender diverse professionals, and then families, like LGBTQ families with gender diverse youth. And so this, you know, creates like a very beautiful community where kids can be with other kids like them, and then also parents and families can find a lot of support. You know, they just announced that they have a grandparent support group with transgender grandchildren, you know, and I think that it is a very beautiful place, and you can have like a lot of really beautiful conversations. And the next one is Center for the Developing Child. It just does a lot of stuff with sort of best practices around education. It's based out of Harvard. It's really cool. Equality Maine, which I was checking out, which is really rad. They have a bunch of education and outreach programs, like media, education materials, consultations, trainings about LGBTQ youth and how to be the most supportive. And then when I was joking earlier, I did list myself as a resource. So the website, which Lander so kindly said earlier, my spouse and I started it in, I think it's about our second birthday. We have a lot of book reviews. We have a lot of educational information. We are actually just rolling out a newsletter that we're going to have premium content with, like curriculum subscriptions and sort of educational videos. And then I also have a podcast where we talk about all the stuff that I just talked about, just with two of my really good friends. And then Southern Poverty Law Center is really great. They have a lot of excellent education information and education curriculum, just like Teaching Tolerance, which is really great. That's really geared towards teachers or homeschoolers. And then We Need Diverse Books, which is a nonprofit, and they are always coming out with really amazing interviews with authors and illustrators of color. And then they also have a grant program where BIPOC and LGBTQ individuals can get supplemental income if they have an unpaid internship in the publishing industry. So they're trying to work with the folks, you know, how we talked about the unpaid internship. So we so often find in New York City, which I live outside of Boston, and it is wicked expensive. And New York City is bananas expensive. So in closing, this was me. This was all of my ranting, and I am so excited to answer your questions, and I really hope you all continue these discussions. And if you want to get in touch, you can send an email. We're on Instagram. I really try my best to answer every single message on Instagram. It's a point of pride at this point. Feel free to send a DM there. And then our website is The Tiny Activist, which I can also, here we go. Here's what it looks like. Kind of go down, and then we have all sorts of...
I think it's on your other monitor, Corrie.
Oh no! Never mind, just check it out yourself. It's great. We also have STEM curriculum, and it's super great. So I am going to stop sharing right now and, you know, be quiet for a second and see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much, Corrie. That was so fabulous.
I don't know if I have to do anything to answer the questions.
I think Lander's been monitoring the chat, although it looks to me like she just froze up for a second. So
Can you
chat? Oh, there she goes.
Am I back?
You're back.
Back.
Thank you so much, Corrie. That was amazing. I feel like I learned so much, and I'm so excited to check out all these new books that you mentioned. And
oh my gosh, I'm so glad.
It was super wonderful, and I can't wait. I have a whole list of people that I feel like will really enjoy this.
Oh no, we lost her again.
Oh. Sorry about that. My internet connection is a little unstable, I guess.
All right, I can hear you. Good. Thank you. Thank you for all the nice things that you're saying.
Hannah, if my internet connection goes weird, do you want to read anything out of the chat box?
Sure. Yeah, I know we had a question a little bit earlier from Molly, who was saying, I'd love to know more about Mr. Daunt, who is recasting Waterstones into indie-like bookstores in the UK by giving buying autonomy to individual stores. She says, my favorite bookstore anywhere is the Daunt shop on Marylebone High Street in London. Is there a relationship? The Daunt shop is small, packed with great books, which gives you confidence to look seriously at the titles you don't recognize given their company.
Oh, that sounds rad. I would love to go there. I don't know too much about him. I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about him a little bit. Yeah, he basically turned around Waterstones by like having the indie model. And now he's doing the same thing for Barnes and Noble, which, you know, I'm glad that they're returning to the indie model, but I think it's sort of like a Band-Aid. Like I said, they put all the indie bookstores out of business than to just take their business practices. But I think 5 or so years, maybe he's been having the job. I hope that he also owns that bookshop because that bookstore sounds awesome. I don't think I really answered your question. I'm sorry. I just did like a tiny bit of nervous babbling. So.
Well, and you're talking about, you know, the lack of independent bookstores contributing to this issue of the systemic inequality in publishing and getting books into the hands of kids and parents and educators. It made me really grateful for our locally owned independent bookstore here in Blue Hill. So
yeah,
quick plug as always for Blue Hill Books. You know, I personally just bought a bunch of diverse picture books from them for some kids of a friend of mine, trying to make their bookshelf more inclusive. And they're such great resource for the community. If you need recommendations, if you need a place to buy your books, and also, if you need recommendations, I encourage folks to reach out to our children's librarian, Claire, who knows about tons and tons of amazing children's books that are being published on all different subjects, all different identities. So even though the numbers are dire, there's some really bright, shining stars out there that are just fantastic reads.
So true. I feel like I could recommend books all day long. However, if you wanted to do your own research and find out more, you spell his last name. It's just James, James, last name Daunt, like haunt, but with a D. So I hope you find out lots of cool stuff.
I'm not seeing any other questions popping up right now. Does anyone else have a question for Corrie?
I'll try and ask.
Type it in the chat, or as Lander said, you can raise your hand.
Corrie, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question. In your work with the Tiny Activist and in sharing all these incredible books, do you ever get a chance to work at all with the authors? Are you ever in touch with the authors, or do you mostly just like find them kind of out there in the world and then pull them in, or how does that work?
Well, the beautiful thing about social media is there are so many gorgeous, you know, authors and illustrators that have, you know, they're on Instagram or they're on Twitter. And so it's really nice to sort of be able to talk with them and chat with them a little bit. And I have this one weekly series that I do on Instagram called #Sweets and Social Justice, because I have lived many lives, and I used to be a pastry chef. And so sort of, you know, when all of this popped off in March, I found myself at home doing a lot more baking. And I was like, what if I spotlight a book every week that has like a strong social justice theme, and I make like a dessert to go with it? And so that's been really fun. In some instances, I've sent the author a message and been like, I know this is a really bizarre question for a stranger to ask you on the internet, but like, what's a dessert you like? Because I just want to talk about your book. And so that's been really fun. I've enjoyed that. And we, on the podcast, are actually starting a bi-weekly series called PB&J, Picture Books and Justice, where we get to interview authors and illustrators about their books and sort of about social justice topics, which should be really fun. And so that's been really cool to be able to talk to some creators and sort of some individuals that are in the publishing industry. So
that's so cool.
And I see we have another question from Amanda. asking, she says, thanks for the wonderful talk. I was just wondering if you foresee pushback from parents who may not want to see diverse children's books. And if yes, do you have some strategies that educators might take to better handle those situations?
I heard this phrase and I am obsessed with it. It was called, the person was saying that they're a pathological optimist. And that like resonates in my soul. I am a pathological optimist. So I would love to say that no, there wouldn't be any pushback. But there is definitely going to be, if there's pushback from any variety of things that seem like common sense, and yet somebody has an issue with it. I think that what we can do, again, like I said, I find it super easy to talk about statistics and actual real life examples. Whenever I had pushback in the classroom, a lot of times, sometimes people just want to be heard. You listen, and then calmly, I have calmly explained in the past, I understand why you might be worried. This is why I'm going to make the decision I'm going to make. I'm going to discuss these topics, in a developmentally appropriate way with students. I'm going to talk about activism and pipelines when we talk about, the environment, because it's a threat to the environment. I'm going to talk about enslavement when we talk about some, another specific topic, because I really believe that any topic can be broached at any age, and things aren't going to change unless we start changing them. So if we start from the beginning, baseline, building that foundation of social justice education and, acceptance, loud celebration of everybody, then it overall creates, just a much more wonderful environment for everybody, because the world's a diverse place. And especially if you work in a public school, it's going to be diverse. It's the public sector, and we need to be talking about all of the things that happen in the public sector in a developmentally appropriate way. So I hope that's enough strategies.
That was really good. Those are a lot of good suggestions. I learned a lot from that.
Thank you. Good. I'm glad it helps.
Amanda says that's awesome, and thank you as well.
You're welcome. Thanks for your awesome question, Amanda.
And Corrie, we've had a bunch of people saying thank you so much. Thank you, Corrie. And a few people have had to hop off. And we have one person who's across the country and didn't quite get the time right, but wants to go back and watch the beginning of the recording as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me. You're welcome, I guess, if that's the appropriate answer. I tend to just return with another thank you. I am so appreciative that you all wanted to listen to all the stuff I have to say that I care so much about, that I think everybody should care about.
We really, really appreciate having you here, Corrie.
Yeah, thank you, Corrie. This is great. Hopefully you can come visit in real life someday.
I'm on the way. I'm in Massachusetts, so I can't come yet, but soon, hopefully soon. I always joke that I'm going to radicalize the children, but legitimately, that's what I aim to do. So, but in the best way possible,
It's wonderful. I love it. I'm so glad we have you to learn from. And we just got another comment in the chat box saying, I learned so much and really look forward to exploring your website. And that's from Paula, and she's a grandmother of 2 children that we have here in the community. So
cool.
Oh, looks like we have one more question before you go.
Sure.
Molly's asking, Corrie, do you have any favorite book lists for social justice and diversity picture books and chapter books?
And chapter books. Okay, no big deal. Just
the whole spectrum.
Okay, I'm going to try to catalog these verbally like they are in my brain by age group. So social justice books. One thing that I really like about the website, I'm trying not to plug the website 100 times, but you can search by hashtag, which is why we went with the website host that we have. So you can search social justice and come out with a whole bunch of stuff. Some board books that I really like are A is for Activist, Counting on Community. Those are both by Innocenta Negara, who is an Indonesian author and artist. He's really amazing. Those have been out for a few years and they're really excellent. There is, let's see if I can reach it. I just got this one, and this one's super cute. It's by Downtown Bookworks, which is a small indie publisher in Brooklyn, and I think Brooklyn. They do a lot of cool feminist social justice books, board books, picture books, and they have some chapter books too. They have a really good one called Girl Activist, which is all about girls and women activists. They have a really good one called A Black Woman Did That, which is sort of 42, it profiles 42 different Black women that did, you know, a lot of really cool, groundbreaking, trailblazing stuff. Let's see. A new picture book from Penguin Kids just came out about Shirley Chisholm called Shirley Chisholm is a Verb. And it's really cool. It has a lot of really great vocabulary. Shirley is one of my heroes. She is a total badass. That one is so good. There is another chapter book that just came out called Dress Coded by Carrie Firestone. And that is about a girl who actually starts a podcast to document all the unfair pieces of the dress code that are at her school and how they unfairly target not only girls, but girls with specific body types. And sort of, that's heavily social justice. It's really good. Let's see, what else? Normally I have like a giant stack of books everywhere. Those are all the ones that are in my brain right now. Oh, also the Little Feminist Book Club has a set of 3 board books that are really great. They use real photos, they're super diverse, they're super inclusive, and they can, you know, be used for like social justice topics. Anti-Racist Baby just came out in a board book and a picture book form. I have both because the publisher is very nice and sent them to me. The picture book is the same as the board book, except it has a letter to parents and caregivers in the back with sort of like some conversational strategies in them, which I think can be super helpful. So I would recommend the picture book. The board book is great. Like I said, they're exactly the same, but the picture book has the letter in the back. So those are
a great list. That's wonderful. Yeah, and it sounds like, I know you don't want to plug your website too much, but I can plug your website. It sounds like Corrie's website is like such a good resource for looking for more recommendations at all those different levels. So.
Yep, I totally agree. Awesome. Well, this has been so wonderful, and I can't wait to share the recording with a bunch of other people as well. Thank you so much, Corrie, for spending your time with us this afternoon, for sharing your expertise and your wisdom. And
you're welcome. I was so happy to, really. It was a joy.
You're very good at what you do.
Thank you.
See, I think we're at time. We're at 3:30, so we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night. And if you have any further questions, you can send them to me at Blue Heritage Trust, or to Hannah, or to Corrie if you got her email address.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Corrie, and have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Hannah.